Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the New York Times bestselling author and two-time Edgar-nominated author of 15 novels, including Expiration Date, Canary, and the most recent California Bear, which was an instant USA Today bestseller, as well as the graphic novels Breakneck and Redhead. He's written several stuff with James Patterson. It's a lot of audio plays, I guess we will call them. He's written a slew of comic books. I can't even. We're gonna get into it anyway. It's Duane Swierczynski. Duane, how are you doing?
I'm good, and thank you for having me, Robert. Awesome to be back on your live stream. This is cool. But how many months later? This is now like 10 months later, I think we were
Well,
last spoke.
no. So you
No,
and
it
I
was
spoke
long
last
ago.
year,
That's right. That's right.
but I saw you last at Reeds and Company when for the
Yes.
launch of California Bear. You were kind enough to ask me to kind of be your little moderator during your tour. So we were
Yes.
we were discussing the new book, and
Yes.
yeah, how
That's
many
right.
comics how many comic books have you written? Your Amazon bio says over 250, but do you know how
I think
many
it's a little
you've
more
done?
now. I sort of did a guesstimation, just counting up the series. I like for Marvel for a while and DC and like a lot of runs on Godzilla. So I mean, roughly, yeah, it may be close to 300 by now. Single issues, I would say, which is, not bad. Although not nowhere near as prolific as, many comic book writers. I mean, they usually crank out thousands, over their careers. I've slowed down.
Still, no, that's incredible. And of
No,
course,
it's
California
great.
Bear is the new novel. There was
Yeah.
announcement a little while back. You got some an option. I think Ryan Coogler
Yes, yeah. His
was
company,
has some
Ryan
involvement.
Coogler of Creed fame and of Black Panther fame, his company is Proximity. They were into the book, and it was optioned by 20th Century Studios, which is great. So we're kind of slowly working on that and gearing up for that one as a feature. So that'll be fun. Yeah.
Now, oh, really? So as a feature, so I mean, because I could see it
Oh
being,
yeah.
you could potentially do maybe like limited, like a 6 episodes type of thing. But I think as a feature, yeah, that makes sense
Yeah.
too. But uh, and I mean, I think earlier today on Amazon, Jeff Circle had made a comment that he loved the book, and of course, the Girl Detective was a huge fan for a lot of readers.
Mhm.
I'm just going to get right to it. Are people going to see the Girl Detective again?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I have at least two more books planned that are like sort of direct sequels. But I'm kind of taking a minute to like work on the movie version because you know what, that sort of does influence things a little bit. I want it to be, close to each other. So, no, but it's very much. I've had actually in mind a whole long series, but we'll see how it goes. I have two more books, yeah, in mind.
Awesome.
Just see it through. Yeah,
And yeah, just I guess to mention it last time we did do the live stream, it was for your short story collection, of course,
that's
Lush and
right.
Other Tales of
That's
Boozy
right.
Mayhem. And I remember when we spoke last, you had said that the plan was to do another collection at some point in the future. Any idea of when we're going to see another collection?
I mean, the next one, if it when it happens, I'm still other things that are sort of lining up ahead of it. But because this is like these things are more for fun and a passion project than it is. No one's clamoring for a collection, but it may be actually a collection of nonfiction stuff. I've got a whole lot of nonfiction pieces that I kind of want to gather under the covers to yeah, just let them live. I mean, going way back. I mean, I started out as a journalist way back when I was a young man. And there's just pieces I'm proud of that are just, kind of, on yellowing pages somewhere in a storage bin. So I want to resurrect those. So we may do
Yeah.
that at some point.
Yeah, speaking about being a journalist, I remember we had discussed that earlier this year during your book tour again at Reeds and Company. Um,
Yeah.
and we had discussed, I mean, obviously we were there for California Bear, but with me, I always try to kind of push back. So in terms of just your history of writing and how you came about. So I know we had discussed some of what we're going to discuss today. I, of course, don't
Yeah.
remember any of it. The
Well,
whole
you had
thing
great
kind of just
questions. I thought you did a great job. I mean, you had a deep dive, almost like a retrospective. Like you covered so much in so little time. So
It was, and quite honestly, I had so many more because I think I over prepared with those note because I had notes cards because I was like,
right.
you know what, there's an actual audience here. When we do this live, and I figured like it's just you and me over Zoom. It is what it is. People
Yeah.
tune in, great, or they watch it
Yeah.
later. But yeah, here it was like, oh no, we actually, and it was packed. A lot of people had come out to see you, which was awesome. But
Yeah, despite the freezing PA cold, which I've forgotten about how cold it is in
right.
January.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so Secret Dead Men. That was your very first
Yes.
novel. It has just been re-released by Titan Books. Now,
Yes.
that came out in 2004, which means that it's now, I mean, technically, I guess the 20th year anniversary of that novel. It's been re-released.
Yeah.
Remind me again, was that your first published novel or your first novel?
First novel, and it's funny. It was first published novel by a few months. Actually, it was I think out technically. I want to say it was January of 2005. So it's just shy of it because it was a small press called Point Blank. They put that out, and then as I was waiting for that to come out, I'd sold my second book, The Wheelman, to St. Martin's. So it was like I had two books out in the same year, which makes me seem really prolific, but they were written like 5 years apart. So it was just an accident of publishing. Yeah, and here's the original cover of Secret Dead Men. And I love this cover because the model, is my grandmother's ex-boyfriend from the 70s. And I always loved this picture of him. He was clowning around. His name was Joe Sladisco, which is the best name ever. It's just sort of, to me, it sounds like he's a sort of low-level mob collector or something. It wasn't in real life. He looks like, right? This is a wise guy, this dude. So I just love this picture. The reprint, though, they went a little more cool, noir, and a little classier. Joe's gone, but this cool illustration is here, which I do like the Art Deco feel of it, and yeah, it's a nice little volume. So I'm very proud of the cover.
Yeah, well, before we get into the rest of the whole background with the writing, in terms of the cover, how
Oh,
much
sure,
input did you have when they decided, okay, because obviously they weren't going to use the same type of cover that they did 20 years ago. Did you
sure.
have an idea of, I mean, how much input or feedback did you have when it came to the cover?
Oh yeah, I mean they asked, and I had an idea, which I'm glad they talked me out of. My idea was that because this is the start of, I have a series in mind, and every installment of the series takes place in a different decade. So I thought, how cool would it be like to ape like a 70, it takes place in 76. So you got Bantam paperback from 1976. Like there's a very certain look to it. I don't have one here on the thing, but like those books have a really, distinctive like, you ever see the old Ross McDonald reprints from the 70s? It's like chunky letters, a little tiny picture. It's very a lot of white space. It's kind of cool. So I pitched that, and they're like, "Yeah, it's cool, but no." So we had this. Here's how it this, and so I had some options to choose from, and I'm glad because I think this is much more. I mean, the previous cover I pitched would have appealed to like me, but probably no one else. This though, I think will pull more people in because it does look a little more inviting. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so you are known obviously for just very high octane, high fast paced writing. Um,
I guess so.
Also very over the top at times.
Hmm.
Um, I would say, in fact, actually, I don't think I ever told you this. Was it my very first agent? No, my second agent. He had remarked one time that my writing reminded me of your stuff. So I was like, I always took that as a compliment.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I
Well,
think he
I
had
hope it
read one of
was.
my female assassin series. It was I think probably around the same time. It was
Wow.
probably the Blonde had come out or something. I don't know. But
Yeah.
this Secret
Well,
Dead
that's
Men is
flattering.
crazy in terms of like, it's just like, you know what I
Right.
mean? Like, how did you come up with this idea? And I guess, can you talk a little bit about just, I mean, again, compared to the rest of your books, I mean, California Bear seems completely just mainstream compared to Secret, where you started in terms of what Secret Dead Men. So like, can you talk a little bit
Oh
for people who
yeah.
are familiar, like what Secret Dead Men's about, and then just how that origin, how that started?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I will say that to your point that like it's a very big difference when you're writing a novel and no one's expecting it or looking over your shoulder versus when, people are expecting it. To me, it's like so Secret Deadman was me just having fun. It came out of like after years of like starting a novel and then letting it just sort of die out of either boredom or inertia, or I didn't know how to finish. I just didn't know what to do with it. So this whole thing was that it was the summer of 1998. I was working at Details magazine as an editor. And I come home and I'm like, you know what? This summer I'm gonna finish a book. I don't care if it's bad. I just want to finish a book shaped thing. And I wrote 1,000 words a day, and it kept going. The story is about a detective, a private eye. I was reading a lot of private eye fiction back then, but he has a weird ability. He can actually collect the souls of dead people, and he keeps them in a hotel in his brain. And he kind of uses them as like sort of like a built-in resource library of human beings. And he goes off and tries to solve his crime. He's trying to solve his own murder, actually. There's this sort of little mob outfit out in Las Vegas killed him. So he's trying to solve that crime. In the meantime, he gets wrapped up into another kind of murder mystery to pay the bills. And of course, in classic private eye tradition, both cases are connected, right? This is out of Chandler. This is like what happens all the time. So the real origin story for me though was that I had written a proper murder mystery as a screenplay, and and it's pretty bad. Make no mistake, it's my very first time trying to figure it out. But I like the plot, so when I actually realized, okay, I want to do this, take that plot and drop it into like more of a science fictional supernatural thing. That's when it kind of came alive for me because that was exciting. I had no idea if it would work. And that was the fun of it. I was reading a lot of Philip Dick, or a lot of Robert Sheckley. At the same time, I was reading a lot of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. So like those two flavors, like chocolate and peanut butter, came together, and made this weird thing. But for me, it's important. Like the biggest thing for me is I learned that, yeah, daily word count is important for finishing a first novel, but also your own personal interest in it. Like you have to want to live with it for a long time. And I think if you know exactly where it's going to go, you won't necessarily be excited to return to your keyboard every day. Whereas this, I often had no idea where I was going with it. I was like, "What now?" And I was like, "Okay, let's go follow it." That was the fun for me, and I realized that's how you, at least for me, that's how I, keep excited about a project.
So, in terms of plotting out the book before you start, is that because again, I know we had discussed this earlier this year, reads and
Yeah, we
company for your
did.
thing,
Yeah.
but remind me again. Obviously, for this one, you were just kind of doing it by the seat of your pants, the pantser method for people who prefer that term. Do you outline, or is it like a combination of both?
I should actually clarify I did pants it with Secret Dead Man. However, I did have the screenplay. So I actually had things I can pull from. When in doubt, I'm like, oh, let's drop this in here now. So I had almost a little side guide. But I've done both, honestly. Like the Blonde, I think I was really, Wheelman was a pantser as well. The third book, the Blonde, I was so nervous about screwing it up because it was like my first two-book deal, from St. Martin's, and I thought, oh, I can't fuck this up. So let me plot this out, and it's very much over one night. It's minute by minute. I kind of had to, right? If I had winged it, I think it would have been a mess. I really had to know what was happening to every character, of those, whatever it is, 12, 13 hours in the book. And since then, I've done actually both. I think California Bear wasn't plotted an outline. I kind of knew where it was going in general, broad strokes, but that was sort of I winged it more or less, kind of. Yeah,
So then when you transitioned into like comic books, obviously those have to be outlined. The
absolutely.
same thing too now when you do the audio scripts that you co-write with Patterson, obviously those
Yeah.
are outlined. I mean, how is that like how is that guys transitioning back and forth then from going to this place where you do have to have that structure in terms, especially with comic books, because you only have so many pages per issue,
Yeah.
as opposed, I mean, do you find that being, I guess, a pantser kind of helps you in that case when you transition to having to do the comics or anything with the outline? And then also
Mhm.
versus when you then go to writing something that you don't need the outline? I mean, do you find kind of a give and take, or does it not really have any correlation?
It does actually. Actually, being a pantser does help even with an outline because often the outline I see is just a guide. Like if you want to go off the outline, I don't always do. Like I just that's okay, but I have a better version of that. Let's try this. And so I am like improvising as I go. But I guess it gives you like almost like how you have training wheels. Like you won't fall over with an outline necessarily, but you still have to like pump the bike, ride the bike, and figure out where you're going. Yeah, I think it's actually it's after a while that question almost becomes irrelevant because to me it's like I do both all the time. I feel like yeah, I'm outlining little things and I have endless note files on things. That's what it is. And these days, actually, I'm not thinking about it. I have more of a note file that I keep on this little notes app, that Apple provides for free. It's a brain download of just everything I want to put in this book. It's out of order. It's psychotic, but if I forget something, I'll go back and refer to it like, oh yeah, I wanted to try that with this part of the story. So that's like my sort of working outline, even though it doesn't read like a traditional outline, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, the Apple or that Notes app, I love it. Because I mean, obviously, a lot of my stuff is Apple, so it's synced. So usually on my phone, if I do it,
Exactly.
it'll go, and that's where I typically keep
Yeah.
my if I'm working on a new project, that's where I'll keep my notes or my character list, or if I have a meeting with
Yeah.
my agent or whatever, some like points to go over. And oh no, I
Same
love that
here.
app. That app because I used to like pay for like Evernote. And I haven't used Evernote in I don't know how long because it's like the Apple one's
Same
free.
here. 10 years, 12 years. Yeah. Why? Yeah. No, Evernote was great. Then I guess Apple said, yeah, we'll just give it to them for free. Well, here it is. That's yeah. It's so useful. You can drop articles in there, links to articles, your research pieces. It's super handy. I'm once I start. I mean, I started using it probably 12 years ago, and it really has changed my process a lot. Just because on the fly, you can be like, on a train somewhere, pull out your phone, add a line or two of a thought you had. Whereas you're not trying to find that notebook you have somewhere in your office or that Word doc that's on your laptop. This is like it's always with you, which is good.
So okay, so let's go back to Secret Deadman. So that was the first book you, well, and actually, hold on, I wanted to mention too. You mentioned before because you had the screenplay. Was that the very first screenplay you had written?
Yeah, oh yeah. I heard about a contest. I was back in Philadelphia, hometown, and there was a set in Philadelphia contest, which is just still going, by the way. The local film office has this great annual contest, like based on the best screenplay set in the Philly. And I thought, hell yeah, I know Philly. I grew up here, so that was the inspiration, to try that. And I think I bought like one of those how to write a screenplay books, at least for the format, because I thought, well, how hard could it be? Just dialogue, and it's incredibly hard, by the way. It's so much to learn, and so much to because it is so concise, and it's almost like a trying to write a poem, which is much more difficult than it is to me to write, a novel because you're just trying to cram so much meaning into so few words. Anyway, so that was me trying to figure out, and just trying to get through it. That was a great learning experience, even though it resulted in a pile of crap. It really was not good.
What do you prefer nowadays? Do you prefer like writing a script or just prose, like working on a novel?
Good question. I think prose will always be my kind of first love. However, over the years, I've like, gotten to the point where I feel like natural writing a script. Let me explain. Like it's like before I would think of a script as like, okay, how do I do this in prose and how do I translate it right into script form? But a few bunch of years ago, I realized, oh, I'm just going to just launch into a script, just launch into it and see where it goes. It felt like a natural language, It's at that point where you are trying to learn a foreign language and all of a sudden you're proficient enough to speak it every day. That's what it felt like after years of like, working on scripts. It's like, oh, I know what I'm doing now. I know how this would feel like, what the flow is, like you do with prose. But my go-to usually is that ideas usually start out as, well, I think actually these days I think, what is this? Is it a book? And if it's a book, do I want to spend, 9 months on this thing? If it's a script, it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, but is it commercially viable? Because unless someone makes it, it's just 90 pages of, you know, brain matter, So that's a serious consideration. It has to be able to be, sell somewhere. Um, a short story can be just an experiment for fun. Sometimes I just want to do that. And a comic is like between the two. If I have a comic idea, I always have in mind a publisher because otherwise, again, I'm not an artist. I can't make this thing myself. I need help. So I think about the potential buyer publisher down the line.
So when it comes to scripts, what do you find is the easiest in terms of film, TV, or graphic novel, comic book, or an audio? Because I imagine I
Hmm.
mean, with those different mediums, obviously, with like the graphic novel, comic books, you have to say what panel. In fact, let's even talk about that. Like, so I
Sure.
wanted to talk, and maybe we can talk a little bit. I really want to stick with Secret Dead Men, but
That's
so we're gonna take a
okay.
little bit of a
Go with the
detour.
flow.
I read
Yeah.
Breakneck recently, and it's like it collects 4 issues, correct?
I think five, I
Four or
think. Yeah, I think
five
it's five.
issues. Yeah, Hard Crazed Crime
Not too
had done
many.
this, and I mean, just randomly, like how did you learn to write comics? Because comics is such a unique, it's so interesting when people want to dismiss comics because it is a true art form in terms of
Yeah.
storytelling. And just like in terms of like it's not like you have just 6 or 8 panels for every page. I mean, you have different things, you have different splash pages, you have different boxes. Do you
Yeah.
like how, like when you're writing the scripts, do you see that in your head, or do you maybe just kind of like maybe sketch it out of like, okay, this is what I want this page to look like? I mean, how do you determine, or is it one of those things that
Yeah.
just comes naturally after having done like hundreds and hundreds of comic books?
I would say it's natural. Everyone's different and it's never easy, honestly. But for comics, I think about, obviously stories first, story and characters, and that comes first. But then the reality of the art form, if you call it that, is you have limited amount of space. Usually it's 20, 22 pages. On each of those pages, you can do like one big panel or like, up to like with your Alan Moore, you can do 12 panels or whatever or more. You can do a lot, but it's a variation of things. And it's like little photographs, little snapshots, and you have to make it all fit. You have to fit your story into those boxes you're trying to do. So I'm thinking about, kind of okay, boxes. What do I want to spend the big boxes on? What do I want to, what's that meant to accomplish? So it's like translating my story into like, okay, here's how this is going to play out. And all that, by the way, is just a suggestion for the artist, because the artist is the one who has to draw it. So I'm trying to like get this idea to a point where I can hand it off to an artist and say, hey, here's the best I can do. Here's what I'm thinking. But if you have a better idea about like number of boxes on the page, number of panels, or a better idea for a splash page, that's the collaboration part, which I love actually, because it's like a second brain on it. We go back and forth. Your editor usually weighs in too. So it's like, to me, it's a weird spectrum, a continuum. Whereas, you have a novel, prose, that requires the most out of a reader. If you read it, you're actually doing all this special effects in your head. You're casting it. You're doing the whole thing. And the movies in the other extreme, it's more passive. You can just sit back and let a movie wash over you. It's great. Comics are like in the middle of those two, right? Because you have the images, you have that kind of given to you, but you still have to make it all move. Like you're still doing a lot of imagination work between the panels. One panel may be a guy with a cigarette. Next panel may be the cigarette's already extinguished in that other person's eye, right? Like you're as a reader is watching what happens between point A and B, and your job as a storyteller and as an artist is to make it as fluid and as fun as possible, and like make it come to life, even though you don't see the hand with the cigarette, bam, in the eye. But you have to imply that motion. That's just a random example of like how to make something come to life a little bit, and that's what I guess I'm concerned about when I'm doing a script. And also, it will be fun to draw. I don't want to bore my artists. Remember, I just my Breakneck. I think it was Breakneck. And I forgive me if I'm talking out of turn here, but like the artist, I asked the artist, what do you enjoy drawing? And I think he said, oh, I like, fantastical creatures and things, and I hate drawing guns and cars. I'm like, oh shit. Because
That's all.
this
That's all
whole
the
book
book
is guns
is.
and cars. So, but that said, he's awesome. I mean, I think I'm pretty sure I may be thinking of the wrong project, but but that to me, it's important. Always check in with the artist and we kind of team up. It's like, what do you like to do, man? What's your thing? What do you enjoy? Just like, if you have a script and you're trying to find a director for it, you want to know, you know, what they get off on, what they are best at, and what they enjoy doing. That's important to me.
So how much does a typical like comic book script then change from your initial one that you turn in, through like I guess like because
Mm,
like for a lot of writers we see the editing process in terms of we submit a manuscript and then of course, there's back and forth with the editor, copy editor, whatever else. The comic book script that you submit, or I mean, I guess you probably have been doing it so long that you just kind of probably know it better now. But I mean, are there
mm.
times where they're just like, you know what, these panels here are not going to work, maybe do this or this or this. I mean, like, or obviously
Yeah,
every project is different, but I mean, it's just, yeah, because there's so many different moving pieces. I mean, like this is by you, but it's not just by you, it's
right.
by everybody else who was involved. It's,
Oh yeah.
by the artist, by, the
Simone,
letter.
the
I mean,
artist,
so
yeah,
like,
the
yeah, it's a
colors,
whole
inkers,
collaborative
yes.
effort.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I only kind of like when I see, I kind of lucky enough. I've worked with so many talented artists that there are really problems of like, oh, it doesn't work artistically. It's more like, oh, on a story level, right? The story thing, it'd be better if we highlight this thing. We're losing something that the reader may miss and I'll be confusing. That's when I kind of step in and say, maybe not this. Let's try this thing. But it's honestly kind of rare. I'm always pleasantly surprised when the art comes in. It's like, man, that's so much better than I thought it'd be. Because in my own head, I'm not an artist, but when I see it, the joy of comic book writing is it's like Christmas every day when you're working on a project. Art will come into your email box. You open up like, wow. So what you've dreamed up, like sometimes just 2 days before, comes to life on a page, and it's so much better than what you had imagined. That's awesome, and it gets you excited. Like, okay, cool. This can work. Um, so it's yeah, again, like, but I guess it's very different from you heard stories about the film TV process where sometimes writers don't recognize their work. It's completely changed because someone's rewritten them 5 times, and that I've not had much experience with, just because I've not had much produced at all. So that's the thing. It's, comics though, it's pretty much, yeah, you're hands on and you're working with them, and I've never felt like I've lost control of the vision, with the comic book. I've always had that say into like, okay, let's make sure this is right.
Yeah. And so with Breakneck, again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if people
That's
can
okay.
check out the actual,
Please buy it.
graphic
It's on
novel
sale.
that puts it together, you have a nice little intro kind of talking about how it came about, which essentially came about from a novel that you had started working on. And they
Yes.
actually excerpt a couple pages in the back of the book, which when I found interesting because as you're reading it, you see this that it's essentially, there's obviously the dialogue between the characters, but then there's also kind of like a narration, and the narration's in second person. And anyone who
Yeah.
knows me knows I love second person. I've written a novel in second person. I oftentimes have a
Hmm.
few like prologues, epilogues in second person. Like I feel
Yeah.
like second person is so underutilized at times. Now, maybe for good reason, because I feel like you have to do it right. Because if you don't do it correctly, it really is going to fuck it up. But and I know in the Green Worm we had talked about the Stuart Onan, A Prayer for the Dying, which anybody who hasn't read that book yet, go check it out. Um,
I see that one. Watch
you
that one. Yeah. Read it.
you this book, I mean, essentially we were talking like you were writing this in second person. How did that come about where you decided? Because again, second person oftentimes scares people away. I mean, my
Hmm.
Avery Bishop novel, One Year Gone, the prologue and epilogue are in second person, and the editor at the time was very much like, yeah, this is great, but I'm worried it's going to scare readers and blah blah blah.
Oh
You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like oftentimes a
Editors
lot of
hate
editors feel it's a
it.
big, just can you talk a little bit about how like what
Sure.
was the inspiration to decide, okay, I want to write this book in second person? And then was there anybody telling you that's an awful idea?
Yeah,
At
I think
least from
most
like a
editors,
commercial standpoint.
sure. Commercially, I mean, most editors would say, yeah, maybe rethink that because it is off-putting. I mean, my go-to second person novel is, of course, Jay McInerney's Bright Lights, Big City. That grabbed me as like, man, it just felt so immediate. That's what appealed to me about it. It was so immediate. It's like, if done right, and it's not easy to do because you really have to like cut all the clutter out and really, have it be plausible. So why I chose it for this book because it was sort of like I know it was maybe definitely a noir novel that was pretty intense. This guy having a really really awful day, and I thought it'd be funny if the narrator is basically God commenting on this guy, talking to him like as he's experiencing his worst day. Because that to me is like an outsider who looks down on the character, and if you're God, you can read that character's mind. You can have a lot of fun with him and just actually fuck with him a lot. It seems sort of sardonic to do. Like it's like mean to do in an entertaining way. So it just felt right. Honestly, the truth is, it felt right. I tried a third person version. I tried the first person version. It just felt like flat. It was missing some kind of energy. So I'm like, let's try this. I think it was another one. I think God, who was it? The book, I think Rex Stout did a second person novel, How Like a God. I think that was maybe the inspiration, honestly. I think that's what it was. Al Guthrie tipped me off to this, God, years ago. And I just thought, what the hell, And I thought I'd deal with commercial aspects later. Funny thing was, and like when the novel, it fell aside. I think I put it aside to do something else that came up that was more pressing. But when it came time, I just saw it as a comic. I thought, oh shit, I'm losing this second person thing, which I thought, gave it energy. What else can I do? And it worked though. To me, it was like, because the camera lens, the camera in the comic book is still a godlike view in a way, right? And I was still able to be mean and punish my characters, make fun of them. All the things that the voice did in the novel version. I don't know. I was able to do it in the comic, I think. I hope so.
So
It's
in your
mean.
newsletter recently, you discussed how you always try to restrict yourself with every new project. When did that
Yeah.
start?
I think
And to
with
be clear
Not Secret
for
Dead
people, can
Men.
you kind of explain just
Oh,
when you
sure.
say you try to restrict things, like what does that mean?
I call it creative handcuffs. And what I mean by that is that, that I try to like, if you do something too much, it's cliche. Like when in doubt, what was Chandler's quote? When in doubt, have a guy with a gun walk in the room. That's easy. But what if you didn't have guns in your book whatsoever? And whenever you rely on a gun scene or a profanity or some kind of thing that you rely on too much, you're forced to come up with better ideas and more creative versions of that. So I think with the Wheelman, the lead character is mute. He's a mute getaway driver. And I thought, wow, how do you have a hero who doesn't talk, and you're not in his mind very much. You're a little bit, you are, but like that to me, I thought was a fun challenge. Like, okay, what can I do with this now? How can I show this world without him talking to us? So that became a tradition starting with that book, just to like, again, if I think it ties in what I mentioned earlier about if I know exactly how to do something, it's boring. It's like, well, I can do that, but I know how to do it. Much rather think I don't know how to do it all. Like I'm thinking, how am I gonna pull this off? That's when I'm excited. So if I have this extra layer of like, if you told me like write a novel without the vowel O, okay, I'll try it. I probably would give it a shot. That right, it makes you think outside the box. It makes you think like, okay, what can I do? Or out certain words or without certain, tropes. So anyway, that's why I do it. Basically it's my mental illness, but I'll pretend it's craft.
Well, you would appreciate this. Years and years ago, I wrote a short story that was published in Space and Time that
Mm.
the entire story did not include the word the.
Ooh, see, I love that. I
And
love
it was
that.
this idea that that words basically keep our world together. And so
Yeah,
I think it was this one character decides to maybe stop using the word the and basically causes all this havoc and craziness. But
that's
yeah, I mean, it
great.
was very like yeah, the actual word the because the is such the you have to
How,
imagine in every story or book it appears hundreds and thousands of times. So yeah, that was
how
the
did
only
you approach?
that
Wow. How did you approach it? Like, how did you do that? How hard was it, and how did you figure it out?
I mean,
Any tricks?
I have to go back. I think it was like, a 2,000, 3,000 word story. It was not a very long
That's
story. So it wasn't
that's a
like I was
lot.
dealing with, with whatever else. And I think I was inspired because at the time I was taking in college, it was I think some type of linguistic class talking about the different types of, just words or whatever else. And that it really inspired me from it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
and I think the
Mhm.
title was End of Our World as We Know It because I couldn't call it End of the World as We Know It because that would use the. So, but yeah, so
Hard.
okay,
All
so
right,
that's
that's
interesting
good.
regarding the restrictions. So going back to Secret
Yeah.
Dead Men, was Secret Dead Men the title, like the initial title?
Oh yeah. In fact, it was inspired by a piece in the Philadelphia Daily News where about it's. I was trying to find it actually recently because I couldn't find it online, and even in my newspaper archives. But basically, it was a bunch of kids found a corpse and kept it secret, kind of like Stand By Me, kind of in real life. And the headline was something like, children hide secret dead man. I thought, secret dead man, that's a cool, triplet of words. I like that. Let's save that. And it came up, that was always the title. I just that kind of captured my imagination for whatever reason. So yeah.
So you had then published the Wheelman around the same time with St. Martin's Press. Was there any talk at that point to take Secret Dead Men, with St. Martin's? Because obviously, the initial publisher was a
Oh,
very small press publisher.
yeah. No, actually, no, because it was like still too new. It was like, I mean, Point Blank Press came out and it kind of just it went on for a little while and then kind of faded away. So, but it was still like viable. Still, you still buy the book. So there was no reason to stop that and bring it somewhere else. And I wanted actually don't forget I had written this in 2000, sorry, 1998. I revised it heavily the next year, and it sat in my drawer for 4 or 5 years. So like to me, it was like I was ready to move on anyway beyond this.
Yeah.
I was excited about the Wheelman and like doing a proper crime novels and actually being more, of a traditional crime writer at the time. That's what I was interested in. So
So 20 years later,
okay.
it's being re-released again. Titan Books, where all good books, are sold. You can find it everywhere.
Yeah,
What
hopefully.
was that process like in terms of revisiting it? I mean, what did you
Mhm.
decide was worth keeping? I mean, were there certain? I mean, how different if someone took the one that was published 20 years ago and they put it side by side with this new version?
Mhm.
What's different?
It's really close, honestly, because my approach to it was I don't like the idea of going back and rewriting things, like the writer I am now is not who I was then, but I don't like the idea of changing it because I'm proud of who I was then, I'm proud of what it was. So I didn't really want to change very much. I want to look for honestly just obvious mistakes that crept into it. my editor, Rufus, who's a Titan, was great. Rufus Purdy. He actually pointed out some, some logic things I just didn't see, and pointed out some like, yeah, this is like not playing the way you may have intended. So those kind of things. I really don't think people notice big things. I think mostly you'll notice little things here and there, and if you do at all. I just think it's a little sharper, than it was. A little more logical. Because, when your first novel is it's your kitchen sink novel. You throw everything in there and hope it works, and it's just okay. And it was kind of interesting looking back on it with that kind of cooler eye, like, okay, yeah, I should have done that. If I was my own editor back then, I would have made myself, fix these things. The funny thing was, going back into it, though, it did make me think about that world. And at the time, those 4 or 5 years before it sold to Point Blank Press, I had like a whole bunch of sequels planned, like spanning space and time. It was a whole bunch. And working on it again kind of inspired me to like revisit the world. And actually, right now, I'm working on a sequel that's set much later than this book, and it's been a blast. It's like I don't know, got my groove back in that way, in that world. It's like, okay, I see where this can go now. Whereas I couldn't have written the sequel back then. I was too close to it. The years helped a lot. 20 years is like, oh yeah, I want to go back into this world and see what's up.
Is there a pub date scheduled yet? I mean, because
Oh God,
the
no.
Titan is the plan that Titan is going to publish the sequel.
There's no plan. It's where they're open to it. Like when I pitched the
I
reprint,
see.
I said, "Hey, I have more books in the series in mind." They said, "Cool," because like you can see, they have on the cover a collective detective novel. That's new. That's actually that wasn't on the first. So I pitched this idea of a series called the Collective Detective, series, and yeah, so that's all new. And I'm deep into the sequel, and I have a prequel in mind too. It's almost a trilogy, but then it branches out beyond that. And in fact, this is probably crazy, but I have an idea for like a comic book spin-off or series about it, like with in that world, not an adaptation, a very different story. So it's been nice after 20 years to actually revisit this world I'm so excited about. But at the time, I was actually really crushed because it didn't sell. Like we had a few near misses with my agent at the time at like, big publishers. And they didn't at the time, this is 99, 2000, they didn't know where it would be on the shelves. Like, is it mystery? Is it sci-fi? What is this thing? And I kept pointing out books like, remember Eric Garcia's Anonymous Rex, like a dinosaur
Hmm.
PI? Big, it was a big splashy thing. It was, I remember like, God is a Bullet, Boston Tehran. I was like, it felt like it was a, horror novel mixed with, so I thought to me, the cross genre thing was super exciting. I wanted to do that, but it felt before its time. And the one response was, "Yeah, we like the writing, we like the story, but like we don't know where to sell it." So I think publishing is caught up with it, by then. I think now cross genre stuff is much more common. So I just had to wait 2 decades.
So when so when you were reworking it though, did you come across, I mean, it was a first novel. We've all written first novels
Oh
and
yeah.
I don't know about you, like if I ever went back through my first novel, I'm sure there were probably lines or paragraphs where I'd want to revise. I mean, were there places where you did revise or like, strike certain sentences or whatever, or did you just kind of keep, things the way they were?
I mean, again, I think I mostly kept everything the way it was, except for obvious mistakes. Like I didn't try to edit like my viewpoint of life at the time. I mean, I wrote this. I was only, was married for only a year.
I meant more, yeah, I mean
I
more for like language, like language wise, you're like, oh God, I
oh,
use
okay.
this phrase or like I use this metaphor or simile, like that
I
type of
think
thing.
I avoided editing myself to make myself sound better. I think I just hey, that was me at the time. I didn't want to do
Yeah.
that to myself. Yeah, I guess I could have, but I don't know, it felt inauthentic to do that. This is
Yeah.
what it was,
Now, does this include like an intro or anything where you talk about,
No, but there's an afterword that I don't want to say too much about because there's a surprise in the afterword. That's all I'll
oh,
say. I'm very proud of
oh,
this. I don't know if you've gotten through it, but there's a bit of a it's I think I pulled off something no one else. I don't think I've ever seen it before. I pull off something in the afterword that I think may surprise people. I'm always jealous of Neil Gaiman did a cool thing where he had a short story in his introduction to Smoke and Mirrors, his first
mm.
collection. I thought, oh, that's an interesting use of an introduction. That's cool. So I thought I did something similar with the afterword. I kind of had a little fun with it, and then in the sequel, I'm trying to pull off something equally nuts. So we'll see how it goes.
You did that with Lush.
Oh, I totally did. Oh yeah, that was a
Yeah,
complete
with
ripoff
the
of me.
intro.
Yeah. I hid my earliest stories in there in the introduction. Yeah. I don't know. I like playing with the idea of what a book is and what it can do. Like the writers that excite me. I remember reading Ken Broom for the first time. Just how spare and like scalpel like his prose was. Like wow. Or James Delroy reading White Jazz was like wow. You can do this in the book. It's almost like a watching a punk rocker throttle the guitar to its like breaking point. Like that's cool. Like what is that? That sound is awesome. Like when writers do that, I love it.
So you'll appreciate this. My short story collection, Real Illusions. Obviously the paperback I couldn't do this in, but the ebook, and I don't really like make this like widely known, so I don't even know if I really ever
Okay.
talked about this. But
Wow.
you know how like a lot of times back in the day, the CDs would always have like a hidden track. I put a hidden
Yes.
story. So at like the
That's
end of
awesome.
the ebook, it's not on the table of contents or whatever, but you'll be able to see like, oh, there's an extra like 10% or whatever, and you keep going.
Wow.
There's a short story there that does not,
That's
appear everywhere
I
else.
love that. That's awesome, man. That's really cool. Because I do that. I track percentages like what can be next. I'd be the guy flipping through, like trying to find out what that's cool.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that.
So yeah, that was always fun. And it's one of those things I just thought about it because it kind of like, never even think about it because it's been so long now. But all right. So obviously that one is out now. It's finally in audio because I think before there was never an audio version, correct?
Actually, there isn't an audiobook yet. I need to
Oh,
work on
there's
that
not an
one.
audio
Yeah.
version.
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
You can see the
just
lack of
print and
research I
Kindle.
do.
No. It's dude. I actually, I definitely want to figure out an audio version of this. It'd be kind of fun to do. I think a narrator have fun with the story. It's a very
Oh,
first person
absolutely.
private eye story that's unhinged. So yeah,
Unhinged is a good word for it. It's a very, very
yes,
good word for it. So let's talk a little bit about obviously, you've been doing a lot of work with Patterson.
yes,
Lion and Lamb came out last year, New York Times bestseller. That
that's
was a
right.
really
Yeah.
fun Patterson. When for anybody who has not read
Oh,
that
thank you.
book, you do something very unique in that book,
Mhm.
which is really kind of hard to discuss, but it's not a traditional narrative. Like every chapter is not a traditional narrative, but it works really,
Right.
really well. Um, and then you've done three audio, I guess we're going to call them audio plays. Is that what we're going to say?
Yeah, I call them personally like audio dramas. I'm not sure
Audio
what you
dramas,
call them.
sure.
Yeah, I mean,
So
yeah, I don't
you've
know.
done
It's yeah,
The Guilty, High Tolerance, which I actually just finished listening to High Tolerance today, and
zero
then
tolerance.
also
Just
um, 7 hours to die. Correct.
correct.
So
It's
those are the three
funny.
you've done.
The
They're
working
all
title
very
was 7 hours to live, and then we
seven
changed
hours to
it.
live. Okay,
It
because
got
I know that
darker,
you also did the
man.
short story collection, three, or you did that novella. What was that one called?
Yeah, 3 days to live. I'm not kidding. Yeah, that's look.
Yeah. So there's always different. So I would say high tolerant. Well, first of all, the 7 hours to live is, I mean, it has
Die.
a clicking or it has a ticking clock to it. I mean, it's essentially you have that time frame of 7 hours. Um,
Right.
High tolerance is not so
Zero
much
tolerance,
of
Robert. Not
a
zero tolerance, not high tolerance. I
Oh
have
God,
zero
yeah, zero
tolerance. That's
tolerance. Sorry.
okay.
Zero tolerance doesn't have the same, I mean, it's a little bit more stretched out narratively, which I think, quite honestly, compared to all of them, is probably the longest. Correct?
I
It's
think
like three and a half
so.
hours.
Good question. I think The Guilty actually technically as far as script pages is longer, but I have to go back and check. I'm not sure. But yeah, it does. It's a different feel to it. The Guilty was like one night basically. This is definitely over a few days. It's spread out. It's like a movie, sort of
Yeah.
spread out in time.
Yeah. So how do you approach these? I mean, obviously, Patterson comes up with the idea, he comes up with the outline.
Hmm.
Do you? At what point, I mean, because you've done three of these so far with him, and I think he's done a handful of other ones, but I think the
Oh
majority of them
yeah.
have been with you. Um,
I'm not. He's done a bunch. There's a series with Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad. I think at
yeah,
least
but I
two
think
or
there's
three
only done at least
installments.
two of those so far. I forget
Okay.
who the co-author was. Well, regardless, so you do this
Yeah, there
now,
are a few
and
others, but
we're
yeah.
talking about script now. Obviously, this is very different because it's not like on a movie script you can say, um, you know, John, interior. John walks into the living room. So and so
Yeah.
sitting on the couch. Okay, done. And then there's
Sure.
dialogue. Here, obviously, there's no reader because we're not seeing the words. We have to just listen to it. So how is that like, how were you able to approach that? I mean, how difficult was that difficult at first with The Guilty? Or was it one of those things where it just again became natural after a while? I mean, what was that process like in terms of having to write something
Yeah.
for an audience who is just listening?
This ties into what we've been discussing so far. Like, I appreciate the challenge, like the perversity of it. Like, okay, all you have is dialogue and sound effects. What the hell can you do with that? And if it forces you to come up with ways that, you didn't quite think of before. Especially like in terms of, you mentioned that scene. A guy walks into a room, sits down, starts talking to somebody. You have to find a way of getting that across without someone saying, "Hey, Robert, you've walked into the room just now and sat down. How are you?" It's like you have to, you can info dump if you want, but it's deadly boring and no one will listen to you. But so you have to like set things up in the dialogue that, automatically give a reader immersion that they're there with you. And I think um, I'm trying to think of like specific tricks I would use to do that. I think honestly, it's actually the biggest thing you do is from one scene, you want to set it up so when it bounces to the next scene, the reader is right there with you. Like almost leave it like hanging, like here's the bad version. Like, I better go talk to Robert. He's out of his mind. You hear a door slam. Hey, what's going on? Listen, Robert. Like it's like what's going on there. You don't have to actually narrate what's happening, but like the dialogue will set it up in the previous scene. The reader is with you, expecting this next scene. You give it to them, and then you kind of twist it for them, and kind of give them something they don't expect. Does that make sense? You bake it into all that, the dialogue, if you can. It's a poor
Right.
example,
So
but
then
that's
how
yeah,
about in
what I'm
terms of
thinking
just the
about.
transitions and everything else? Because again,
Yeah,
like let's talk the more recent one, which and in all of these ones that you've done, I mean, you've had heavy hitters plays. You had John Lithgow, or
yeah,
in with
crazy.
The Guilty. I mean, God, that's just he's amazing. And then
Yeah,
you had
he's
Hilary Duff with Zero Tolerance, or not Hilary Duff. Good God,
Hillary
you
Swank.
had
Hillary
Hilary
Swank.
Swank
Hillary
with
Duff
Zero
was in High
Tolerance, and then Sarah
Tolerance. I'm kidding. I'm
Paulson with the
joking.
more recent one.
Yes, they're
So
awesome.
what I found interesting, and that's something too, because I'm kind of, trying to think about a potential project of doing it too, where
Yeah,
The Guilty, you had an actual narrator who was like narrating kind of like scene direction stuff. Whereas
yes.
opposed to, and I saw that you kind of changed this up with Zero Tolerance and 7 Hours to Live. Am I getting that
To die.
that one?
I know. Going back, it's Dallas to die. We're not dying.
So, anyway, the more recent one, starring Sarah Paulson, it was very interesting in terms of like essentially, you kind of have a narrator there to help
Yeah,
kind of anchor the action in a way, and it's explained later on what like how this narration is coming about. It's not just like this like godlike
yeah,
narrator who's explaining things, which I think was very creative. Which again goes to this idea like having to figure out ways to do things organically so that it doesn't really
yeah.
stick out too much. Um,
Right.
at that point in I mean, do like, because it's a Patterson project, obviously, okay, this is going to be, a big deal. They're probably going to get some heavy hitter stars in here. Like at the time, do like, oh, Sarah Paulson's going to be attached to this, or that comes like way later?
That comes, I mean, for me, I didn't learn that until quite late in the process at all. So I wasn't writing for a certain, actor, which is probably good because I don't want, because you don't know who you're going to cast. And I don't want to tilt it to a certain direction. But yeah, I mean, I just try to think of the character we've created, like who is this person, and trust the casting process to, find the right fit. So I'm not doing that. But yeah, you mentioned the narrator stuff. Like that's one big way to like help guide the reader. Another one in Zero Tolerance, actually, I used news reports, like NPR type reports, to like give information, set the scene, introduce characters even. That was kind of cool. That was good to use. And I thought about as you were talking about, what to keep in mind is with all these audio dramas, you're wanting, readers, actually listeners, I should say, they want to be there with you. So you never eavesdrop on somebody. We all have, right? Eavesdrop on two people having a messy argument. You listen intently. It's like trying to figure out what's the deal. What's their deal? Who's wrong? Who's right? Who's crazy? What are they going for? Who's winning? So all that you use, that's the listener doing that work. So when you're writing it, you want to just give it enough to go on, intrigue them, and think, and have them unpack it and almost like flesh out what they think is happening with these characters. So I imagine being a creepy eavesdropper in a bar. That's what I imagine when I'm scripting these things often. If I just was dropped in, could I figure out what was going on with these two? So who doesn't like to eavesdrop? People.
Do you read your work aloud, after you've read it when it's in draft form?
Later, not in the moment because it's so to me it's ever changing. So, and I only do it when I think it's something that doesn't track right. I'm thinking, does this sound right? I will speak out loud a few things, especially the audio drama stuff. I will try to, because you also don't want to give the actor, the performer, a mouthful of words, right? It's nothing worse than like, it may look great and maybe a brilliant sentence technically, but go ahead and try to speak it, right? People don't speak, in full, complete sentences and brilliantly all the time. So I do read out loud some words to make sure, oh yeah, that sucks. I'll remove a few words that now it flows. Now it's, not strunk and white, but it'll work for
Right. I mean,
dialogue.
yeah, it makes sense, especially for the audio dramas, because it is going to be out loud.
Yeah, yeah,
So, what is that? What is the editing process typically like? You turn in the script. I'm sure Patterson, does a pass. I mean, how much back and forth
yeah.
happens between Audible, Patterson, yourself? Um, and like, are there times too where they might be like, there's just no way we can, we're going to make this scene work because of the, you said we want to use the sort of sound effect, or has that never really
Hmm.
been an issue?
That's come up. Yeah, definitely. Patterson and I go back and forth, on these things until it sounds right to us, and then we kind of turn it all over to Audible, and they have their team goes through and has notes. Often almost always great notes. And because you can see, all these blind. You want someone notes to give you the things you don't see, your blind spots as a writer. Oh, I didn't think about that. You're right. Let's rethink that. And I do believe in the idea that when someone points out something, you probably should fix it. When they tell you how to fix it, usually they're almost always wrong. Yeah, the fix has to come from you, right? So if you say, "Oh yeah, that's a little clunky," you'll look at it, and that's Patterson's process. He won't so much give me like change lines 4 and 5, and here's how you do it. It's more like, yeah, I'll look at that page again. I'm not sure you're doing it. I'll look at it and go, damn it, you're right. You see it once you have that cold idea. Most like you, I step into his mind and see, yeah, Swierczynski fucked it up again. Here we go. Let's try a different version of this. So that's I never had that. We've never had a process where it's like they tell us a scene doesn't flat out work. It's just more like, is it I guess the most common notes are, is it clear to the listener? Will they get it? And that's fair enough. Because you're always playing that game of being suspenseful means you're being a little oblique. You don't want to give it all away. You don't want to be too on the nose, but you can go too far and lose the reader if you're not, with them. You can go the opposite direction where you're just way too much on the nose. You want a little suspense, you want a breathing room. So that's one big note, clarity, almost, how much to go. And I guess the other is, just tightening things up. Does this go on too long? Um, I'm sure you are too. I'm a big believer in like prose is almost like a form of music. It's musical. It has to flow in a certain way. And audio dramas are even more so. Like the back and forth of the characters, a tennis match. It's like blah 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 blah. So it's like you want that flow and feel natural. And I think some notes are about, maybe it goes on a beat too long, or they'll say it needs an extra beat, to like let this breathe a little bit. And those are always super helpful. I
Yeah.
love those notes because I want to hear that stuff.
Yeah, in audio or in Audible has been playing around now with I think it's Adobe Atmos or something, or I forget how you pronounce it, where
Okay.
essentially they really try to play around with just not only like the sound and like the placement of the sound,
Yeah.
where you might have maybe a voice coming behind the listener. Is that something that plays into like have they talked to you about that? Like goes into the scripts, or is that something that just the production side deals with on their end, or because I remember having a conversation with one of the editors there where that's something that they've been really kind of playing around with a lot more and trying to utilize that just idea about the directional sound because most times people are listening to these things with earbuds or some type of like it's not like they're necessarily like in their living room listening to it
Yeah.
from a speaker. So I don't know,
Yeah,
has that
it's a very intimate experience in your
yeah.
car. Yeah, it hasn't come up as far as on the script level. Later, actually, they want it to feel like once you know what room you're in, you want it to feel like authentic. So I'm thinking of like Zero Tolerance, where it was set in a military base, and one of the speaking characters, is called the big voice, the kind of the on-site, public address system. And of course you want to hear that off in the background, like loud, abrasive, but like off in the distance. That's important to have it like not be right front and center, right in the mix. So that I can see, being a story thing. And I try to imply that, in the script, like, hey, in the background, we hear the big voice, garbled, blah, blah, blah. You describe what you're going for. And like sound effects, that's the only thing in the script. I don't have visuals, but I do have sound effects I can use. And I try to describe, you know, the sound of a skull being crushed, what I have in mind for that, or whatever it is. It's kind of fun coming up with a way to describe and get across to the production team. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's how this would sound like. The revving of an engine, what have you. That is fun to play around with too. Um,
Yeah.
but you don't have
Well,
much control after the script, script part,
yeah. Well,
scripting.
we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to keep you much
Oh,
longer, but I did want to talk about this.
yes, amazing
So
book.
this is The Thief by I can't pronounce the name. What's the author's name?
Oh, I mean,
This
Funori,
is the
yeah.
Yeah, you
Nakamura.
wrote the
Sorry,
intro for this book.
yes. I'm sorry.
You wrote the intro for this book.
I did. I
And as the
loved
reason
it.
I initially picked it up, I was like, oh, interesting. Duane wrote this intro for this book. And I remember, like most of my books, I had it just forever and before I actually ended up reading it. And
Yeah,
it's such a great book. I ended up buying, like, I think I have his entire backlist now on paperback. It says, like,
yeah.
I still think of that ending, just him in the
Mhm.
alleyway. I don't want to give it away for people who haven't. So,
Yeah.
like, um, I don't know. This is just a really great book. I just want to talk about, like, how did it come about that you wrote the intro for it?
Soho asked me, and I think he knew I was a fan. I met the author briefly at NoirCon, much of year, really briefly, like just in passing. He was a guest of honor, I want to say, geez, 2012, 13. And he reminded me of like I love foreign crime fiction translated because it's also different. They don't use the same tropes we do. Like, it's not the same old thing. It really is a very different viewpoint, and it's always exciting. I read a bunch of books by the guy who wrote Bullet Train. I'm blanking on his name, sadly.
Oh
That became
yeah,
the Brad
I
Pitt
have
movie.
his. I'm looking at Three Assassins right now. Me,
Yes, yeah,
Ko Arto Isaka.
yes. So
I
it
think.
feels like, to me, it's like it feels just so fresh and exciting, like as if I'm reading crime fiction for the first time all over again. It's a different viewpoint and it's
Yeah.
different like expectations. So yeah, I love The Thief, and I just thought when they asked me, "Hey, would you want to do an introduction?" I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm thrilled to. That's my favorite thing in the world to do that.
So Bullet Train, which is better, the book or movie?
Oh, the book. I mean, the movie I had a lot of fun with, but the book is just so much more rich. It's bigger. It's
I
it's
felt like though
insane.
the book. I felt like the movie. I personally felt like the book kind of did not have an ending. You know what I mean? Like I kind of felt like, whereas the
Sure.
movie, I kind of
Yeah,
felt
I
like there
see
was
that.
more. And I really liked how they actually, the Prince had that, had that connection. I thought it was very interesting, which again goes
Right.
back to the adaptations. I mean, you've done, you've done stuff in film, TV. It's always interesting where I think
Yeah,
it was Harlan Coben always talked about, like, the book obviously is the book, but and it should never be the exact same thing as the movie or film, TV should never be the
absolutely.
exact same thing because that would just be boring. Like it's always trying to find a way to do something a little bit fresh. So for people who are coming at it who have read the book,
Yeah,
they can enjoy it the other way too.
absolutely. Yeah.
Um, but all right, so Dwayne, again, I don't want to keep up any more of your time. The I don't. It's not a new book; it's a new re-release, I guess we would say. Secret
But new to
Deadman. If you want to
most.
hold up that cover again for everybody to see,
Here it is,
there it
Secret Dead Man.
is. Available in trade paperback and ebook, where all fine books are sold. And of course, real quick, of course, you have your newsletter. You just sent one out earlier today
I did,
um,
yeah.
about your a little bit of a road trip. You want to talk about, want to take a couple of minutes and talk about that?
Oh, just I don't want to spoil it. Actually, this will be a multi-part newsletter, so I don't want to ruin the suspense.
Well,
But
just
I
what's
went
the
to
setup? I mean, essentially, people
no,
who
I'm
follow you
kidding.
online saw the pictures. You went out to.
Yeah, I went to Joe Bob Briggs has this jamboree. This is the fourth one. And he shows movies from dusk till dawn. Random assortment of not random. It's carefully programmed, but you don't know what it is until you're there. Basically, it was just great. It was a great time to be outside in the desert air with a bunch of fellow horror nerds, just experiencing it. To me, the most indulgent thing I do, honestly. This is my me time thing. I love all night marathons. Honestly, I go to Beverly has them every year. They have often a few of them. it's just so much fun to sit back and like unplug from the world. No one can reach you. There's no news. There's no polls. There's no nonsense. All you're there letting this art wash over you for like 12 hours when you're eating too much popcorn, making questionable diet choices, and drinking too much Diet Coke to stay awake. I love it. So that's what I did. So I'm writing about it. And I had, some a little bit of an adventure in Las Vegas. I'm trying to, do a little travel log thing just for fun. I want to capture the moment. I had a good time.
Awesome. So again,
Yeah.
the new re-release is Secret Deadman. Everyone go check it out, especially for that afterward. I definitely need to pick it up to figure out what this thing is. So
Yeah.
you definitely did a very good tease on that. And then where can people find you online, on social, your
Oh,
website?
yeah, actually, the clearinghouse is gleefulmayhem.com. It's actually, since we last talked, it's up and running, this website, gleefulmayhem.com. And it has all my like social links and everything else there. But I'm pretty easy to find. You throw a rock and you'll hit me in the head.
All right, awesome. So all right, so Duane, again, thanks for hanging out. Everyone go check out
Thanks, Robert.
Duane's huge backlist of works. Oh, real quick,
Yeah.
after having read Breakneck, I was like, oh, I need to check out Redhead. Is the best way to get that off of the Carpenter's store? And if
Storm
so,
King.
is there a collection of all of them? I couldn't really tell if they collect
Oh yeah,
all issues.
there's a trade collection of it. And actually, I think you can buy it online, but the best place to go is actually Storm King Comics. I think it's dot. Either way, between Storm King Comics, it'll pop up. And actually,
Yeah.
quite a few copies they have signed by John Carpenter, who wrote like a really brief afterword for that one, and all of them. He's they're really it's a very small unit. They kind of handcraft these things. They have a few lines. This is part of their Tales of Science Fiction line. So super proud. I mean, yeah, that was one of the first comics I wrote after, a family tragedy. So that was like it was a saving grace for me. And it was so good to work with Sandy King Carpenter, John's wife. John Carpenter, the director, by the way. I should tell you that. That's John Carpenter of Halloween fame, and his wife Sandy do this comic line. In fact, in about 2 weeks, we're doing a signing at Golden Apple Comics in LA. If you're happen to be in LA, we do a signing of the every year they do an anthology called Tales for a Halloween Night, and all the contributors gather around with John and sign stuff. It's awesome. It's like my version of adult Halloween. Just so much
All right, and
fun.
that's again in 2 weeks. You said where was
I
that
want to say
again?
the thing is, if you're in LA and you want to actually, what's today's date? The 9th. If you go in, I think it's go on sale. I want to say it's on my Twitter feed. I think when you go, you have to go in person and sign up for it. It's the first. They cap it at 200 people, so it's not like thousands because it would be for John Carpenter. So yeah, go there and get a place in line and come out and say hi to us. Yeah, and get your stuff signed. It's a lot of
Very
fun.
cool. And then, of course, we're at about mid-October right now, so I know we're coming up to the holidays. Your daughter's foundation, when's that going there? I'm assuming you're going to do another drive.
Oh yeah, it's the seventh annual book drive, and thanks for mentioning it and bringing it up. I really appreciate that. It kicks off October 28th, so keep your eyes peeled for that. This year we're focusing on picture books, which I love. It's like the hospital has a need for picture books, kids, who want to just lose themselves in art and stories. So yeah, that'll run October 28th through I think December 9th, I believe. And yeah, every year it gets bigger and bigger, and we're more and more appreciative of everyone who chooses to donate a book or money or whatever have you. So. Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And of course, when that comes out, we'll all be sharing it online. Everyone should check that out too.
Cool.
Definitely helps people, the kids at the children's hospital. So, all right, Duane,
Yeah.
again, thanks for hanging out, and we'll see everyone next time. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. Take care.